Welcome everybody to the panel room. Today we're talking about mapping the imaginary realms, and I'm your host, Jeanne Adams, and I'm going to have this wonderful panel introduce themselves, starting with Matthew.
Hi, my name is Matthew Saunders. I write mostly historical fantasy. I've written a trilogy about the Brides of Dracula and another sort of occult detective series. I'm working right now on a Southern Gothic. I don't write a lot of secondary world fantasy, so I don't make up my own countries or continents or anything like that with maps, but I do use maps in pretty much everything that I write, and I'm just a big map nerd, and I just want to talk about maps, so that's why I'm here.
Excellent. Tamsin, how about you?
Hi, I'm Tamsin Silver, and I'm an author with Falstaff Books. I write both urban fantasy and historical fantasy. The pictures you see behind me, which are backwards to me, but hopefully forwards for you. Everyone's nodding, thank God. And Billy the Kid oriented. So map-wise, of course, I'm using maps from 1870 and 1949, some of which could be right, could be wrong. It's always an entertaining thing to look up and be like, okay, these don't match each other. But I spend a lot of time researching and I use a lot of the maps that they have. And thankfully, there's people that do Billy the Kid historical books. There's tons of them. And so I had to be very involved map-wise. In the next series in this world, I'll be creating the other world, and I'll be having to have someone help me make some maps. So it should be kind of really interesting to watch how I get to work on the next segment. I'm super excited about it. My urban fantasy doesn't really necessarily need maps because it's places you know, like New York City. But the Billy the Kid stuff definitely is map heavy in needs. I actually insert them in the short story series, so it helps people.
Cool. Michael, what about you?
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write queer-themed urban fantasy, horror, and science fiction. And I use maps extensively in my own research, and I produce maps for the one setting that I have that is totally fictional and made up, which is my science fiction series about the city of Autumn. And I currently am working on the sequel to A Fallen Autumn and finishing a series for Falstaff Books set in San Francisco.
Cool. Elizabeth, what about you?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Noble, and I write queer-themed sci-fi, urban fantasy, mystery, suspense thrillers, some contemporary. Some have a romantic element, some do not. I also have a series that is, I guess you would call it sci-fi, post-apocalyptic fantasy, something. That's the one that has the maps. But I love maps. I have maps in my house. I have globes all over my house. My old house even had a wall that I painted with a mural of a map.
Oh, cool.
Fun.
And I don't have any pictures of it to share because it was a long time ago. But yeah, I'm a map lover.
Yeah. Scott, what about you?
So like Matthew, I am a total map nerd. I actually brought some things to show. This is the Middle Earth map. It's actually the fold-out edition. So if you ever find yourself in Middle Earth, you can actually fold this whole thing out and like look at where you're at and figure out how to get to Mordor. I think it would have been really helpful for Frodo to have this.
Right.
And I have the Atlas of Pern. So if I ever find myself in Pern, I can find myself way around. I fell in love with maps with Lord of the Rings when I read that in 3rd grade. And ever since then, I've just like been fascinated by them. I really find them almost necessary in fantasy books. I write science fiction, fantasy, and sci fantasy, and I've put maps in a couple of my books, some that I've had done and some that I've done myself. I'm reading a book right now that I really love, but there's no map. It's a fantasy book, and there's all these countries referred to, and I'm always wanting to like flip to the front and find out, okay, where's this one? How's it connected to there? Okay, he's going there, and they're going there, so they're that far away from each other. And it's just, I'm a very visual person. So for me, having maps in the books is, especially in fantasy where you've got these kind of quests and these wide-ranging unknown lands, is almost a must. So yeah, I do some of my own maps, like I mentioned, and I'll be showing a couple that I worked on later in the session.
Cool. And as I said, I'm Jeanne Adams, and I write urban fantasy and paranormal romantic suspense and romantic suspense. I write space adventure with my friend Nancy Northcott, and that was one of the places where I started with maps because I love maps. I'm a map nerd too. I have atlases and globes. And, yeah, we're all map nerds. But with the Outcast Station, we had to sort of know where things were because we were sharing this world.
Mm.
And because I like to draw and I like maps, I started drawing all the maps. Well, then Nancy and I also ended up in an anthology that's set in a castle on the Welsh marches in England. And of course, it's a made up castle based on a couple of the castles that are there, sort of amalgamated. Well, everybody said, well, where are things? So I started drawing floor plans. And so when I would talk to people about this, people would go, oh, I love it when you do that. So that's why we started thinking about, oh, for Continual, we should talk about maps. And I think everybody loves a great map. Like you said, Scott, if you're reading a book that is, especially if it's a fantasy and they're talking about these places and you can't visually place them and you're a visual person, it's kind of challenging to sort of think where everything is. So each of you have told a little bit about how you use maps in your work. What kind of tools do you use, Elizabeth, to draw maps or create maps? Do you use computers? Do you use existing maps and alter them? What do you use?
I use existing maps. I actually have I minored in earth sciences and physical sciences in college. So geology and geography was a big interest of mine, more geology. So I have a lot of maps hanging around my house and books of maps. And I use I use the existing North American continent. So basically my maps for my books are just doodles on paper, except for the one that I've actually had created that was for the one series that everything in North America has changed. Like there's no United States, there's no Canada, it's all different provinces. And that's the only time I had the actual map created. And a friend of mine, my cover artist, actually, she created the map for me.
I think that's really fascinating because when you're doing, especially post-apocalyptic, you have a continent to work with, obviously, that's familiar, but then you're changing it. And I think that's another place where readers really love to see what you're doing visually. Tamsin, how about you? You said you were working with historical maps. What tools are you using to sort of make those your own?
To make them my own, I'm not. So I guess you could say it's this historical fantasy. So
Right.
the historical part, and so Billy the Kid fans are very, very specific. They really like things to be as, and you can go to Lincoln. I spent a lot of time there. I can't just decide that, I can't just decide the McSween house is 2 stories tall and have people leave in wheelbarrows, because that's not accurate.
Right.
That's a dig at a movie, but we won't go into that. So
that's sort of a limit, I guess, on
yes,
map using
so
maps.
it does limit me. The only thing I think that I did take a few liberties on is I needed a magical hidden corral for one of the horses. And so I just sort of tacked it on to the stable that I figured probably was behind the Ellis store. That's not actually there anymore. So people can't be like, I don't see how could that possibly be, because they can't go look at it. They can't say it. So I can actually get away with that. But I don't really have that luxury of really building on it, which is why I think I'm really excited for the next section I'm going to work on, which will not only take the world that I built here and expand it, but I'm going to have to decide what the other world looks like. And that's going to need me to sit down and create a map and create other creatures. And I know there's a map. I met a woman at Dragon Con who works on maps, and she designs them. And so I'll be reaching out to her first and seeing if she wants to work on that with me. So that we have something in the front of the book for people when we talk about the other world. Because you can always pull up a map of New Mexico and see where places are. You can look up pictures from 1878 and you can honestly see everything. And that town is almost identical to how it was in 1878. The only difference is that there are a couple extra buildings along the main and some behind. Other than that, that town is the most preserved town in the Old West.
That's so cool.
Walk into these buildings, and they've needed renovation for a while, and they finally got the funding for it, and then COVID happened. And they happen to have to shut everything down, and they haven't been able to fix anything. So they start this weekend. They started, and they will be having to go in and fix everything. And so some buildings will be closed for a few months, and they will have to, they're going to be helping these buildings because these are adobe. They're old,
Right.
and they've been crumbling because big trucks come through there. That vibration has been breaking these buildings down. And so finally they're going to be able to go in and save them.
That's
And
excellent.
so yeah, so it's really great, but that's why I'm a little limited. And I guess I
Yeah.
did that to myself.
Can I just say I love the sentence, I needed a magical corral.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Only in this group of people could you say,
Yes.
so I created one.
Yes,
So I created
obviously,
one.
as you do.
As you do.
Yes, as you do.
But it's funny because when you work in historical, you have a tendency to then go, well, I don't have that. And then you're like, hello, I also write fiction.
Yeah, exactly. Michael,
Magic.
yes, exactly. Michael, what kind of tools do you use? Do you use the computer? Do you just draw? What do you do?
So because I'm not smart, decided to add a tier to my Patreon as a writer where I would draw maps of the city of Autumn for a certain amount of money every month.
Oh my word.
I have since removed to that tier. So to start out, I thought, well, I would like to do digital tools to do this, but I don't have what I feel like are good tools for that. So I just ordered a Midori notepad book, that's grid paper and some nice colored pencils and a ruler, and kind of went to town that way, and got to make a few maps by hand that way, and also just do some rough sketches of sort of zoomed out views of the city.
Right.
This was partly because my editor told me I really needed to have a strong sense of how far things were from each other, or I would quickly create continuity errors.
Yeah.
And she was right, as she is about everything. But also, I hate being limited. And so, when I want things to move at the speed of story, then I do not want to have already set up a situation for myself where somebody says, but that's farther away than that, or whatever.
Right.
But so, in terms of tools, I've used that, and I've done some really specific sketches of specific neighborhoods, and then some really general sketches of the city. And then I also wanted to get into digital tools though, and so I blew some fun money on buying myself a digital pen. It's a 10x6 pad with a pen that you can use to draw on it. And with that, I have done some freehand stuff in Krita, Krita. It's an open source drawing program. It's really good, very versatile. There's a learning curve, but it's not as steep as it could be. And it's frankly not as bad of a learning curve as things like Photoshop. So, it's not necessarily something that you would use if you wanted to get paid a lot of money to do this, but it's very good for just noodling around and drawing some maps and seeing what happens. And so I've really enjoyed that. And that's one of the tools that I keep out on my desk because I really enjoy just playing with it. It's a good way to sort of warm up the creative juices.
I may have to invest in that because most of the maps I do for these series that I do are never seen, but they're vital. So having a tool like that would be great. Matthew, what about you?
For what I'm working on right now, I like Tamsin, I'm a little limited because the Dracula stuff, I'm using real places,
Right.
and I kind of have to stick with where those places are and what they look like. But for what I'm writing now, it's a Southern Gothic, and I made up a town in South Carolina. It's set in the 1960s in South Carolina in this small town that I made up. And so I needed for myself to know on the main street that the drugstore is next to the hardware store, and the theater's across the street, and the barbershop's catty corner from the courthouse. And I had to remember all of that. And so I drew maps for that, the whole area and everything. And what I basically did was I went, I live near Charlotte, but I live on the South Carolina side of the border. I took the city of York, which is the county seat of the county I live in, which is roughly the size of what I wanted the town to be. And I took a Google Maps of the city, and I just rotated it 90 degrees. and I kind of drew over it, changed the street names, but it kind of kept the general street plan of that city. and where things were, how big it is, how far away things were, so that I could get the proportions right for a town that size, basically.
Right.
And you know, and say, okay, this is where this main character lives, and he owns a garage, and so his garage is here. This is where this other main character lives. She's a teacher. Here's her school, where she lives, you know. And like I said, you know, here's the drugstore, here's the liquor store, here's the hardware store, here's you know, on the main street.
Yeah.
So I could remember all that. I don't know if those maps will make it into the book or not, but it's mostly so that I don't like misplace a building, basically.
Right.
Brilliant idea.
Well,
Absolutely brilliant idea. I never
Yeah.
thought of just taking the town you already know. Do you ever
Well,
drive by stuff and go, hey, that's actually where?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great idea too, because then if you're creating a town of a population of 25,000, you just find a town with a population of 25,000 and
right.
change it to your
Yeah.
needs.
Mhm.
That's kind of, and the critter would be a great way to do that Michael was talking about. Yeah, that's cool. Scott, what about you?
So a couple things. I want to say that if you ever watch The Flash and you see the shots of the city of Central City, it's actually Portland. And where the big round super collider thing that they work in is actually in the south part of Portland. It doesn't exist, but they like kind of painted it in. So that's kind of an example of doing that in the quote unquote real world. And also I was going to say to Michael, yeah, I have not been above actually moving things around on my map to make them fit the plot better, and so the other way around. And you can do that before you publish.
Yeah.
Once you put the map out there, it's a lot dicier. So I'm going to try a share here. So I had my earliest maps were created by Gus Lee for some of my books, and Gus did a great job. But I ended up kind of taking it over myself because I wanted to be able to get my little hands on it. So I'm going to try to share here. I first create the map on paper, and I work with it as I'm writing the story, add things in as I'm doing them and describing them, and that gives me that continuity that Matthew was talking about. But then once I'm done, I scan them in and then put them into Photoshop and then draw over them and create a final map. So I'm going to see, this is a live Zoom fun here, so we'll see if it actually works. So let's see, do that one. I'm going to see if it lets me, so you guys can see that?
Hey,
Yep.
cool.
Okay, so this is the original hand-drawn map, and it is sideways for a reason because the other actual book maps are not. So I put it in this orientation so you can see the difference. So I put it into Photoshop, and then I draw out the streets. And then I draw in some more detail, the river, the rail line. And then I put in the background and actually clean it up so that the streets are white, but the background fits the rest of it. Add in all the names, add a little bit more pretty, and there's your final map. So it's basically, they're all in layers. So if I need to change anything, I can go back and modify different layers for the
What
final
program
map.
do you use on this?
Oh, this is Photoshop.
Oh, okay.
And we have Photoshop for our business, which is fortunate because it is not a cheap program.
No.
But I've been using it for about 23 years now. And so I've gotten pretty good with it. Then the other one, that's one. And then the other map here, let's see.
Can I just say that's super bad? That's super cool.
You can say that. We're past the first 10 minutes. You can say whatever you want.
That's super badass. That was
It
amazing.
is.
Okay,
Do
guys
you
see
hire
this one now?
yourself out, Scott, to make other people maps?
I don't, just because it's very time intensive, and I
Yeah.
probably could not do it affordably for other authors. Maybe someday when I get better at it and faster, but it is basically, it's a lot of hand drawing. So like, here's my second one. So hand drawing all the pieces, add in some more of the detail, add in the backgrounds.
Oh, wow.
Name.
That is cool.
And so, yeah, so you basically go from this to that.
That is
And it-
cool.
So there's a lot you can do with
really cool.
Photoshop. Again, I'm not sure, what was the other one called? Critta?
Critta.
Critta.
K-R-I-T-A.
Okay. Does that work in layers too? Because to me, that's the
It
main
does.
thing, is being able to organize different layers and then take away from some layers and add to others. And
Yeah.
I'm sure I do a lot of Photoshop work, and there's a lot of things that I do the long way around that if I took some few classes, I could probably do a lot faster. But I do a lot of manual work on it. But it comes out pretty cool in the end.
Yeah, you can do
Say,
layers.
can you do a class on that? Because I pay to take that class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Elizabeth, did you want to share your map? Because one of the things I was fascinated with what you sent was how you took the known sort of North American continent and you just wrote in where you wanted to do, but you were talking about focusing on the geography. And I think that's really important because I think
How do I share my map?
down at the bottom of the thing, there should be a thing that says share screen.
Is this for the Century series, Elizabeth?
Yes,
I think
for the Century
I can,
series.
I can share it for you, Elizabeth.
I got it here.
And, oh, okay, cool.
Did I do it?
Yeah, you
Ooh.
did.
Oh, neat.
So what happened here is the thicker letters are the protectorates. Those the states went away, and long story short, the whole society changed. And so you have the Yellowknife Protectorate in Erie and New Colorado and Labrador and Sierra Nevada and Prince William Sound, which are things that are still present today. So I use those names because they're familiar. And then what my cover artist, what Terry did, she made it like a geography map where there's different colors, and then there's I want to point to it. There's different features. There's cities in there that are important in the story, and there are lakes, and obviously there's mountains. And then there's a cauldron, which is the big red thing, which is the Wyoming cauldron, which is a real cauldron, and how the story is created is that explodes and changes everything. As the books went on, I had little bits of the map, because the map kind of has spoilers. So with each book, the readers got a bigger and bigger and bigger map.
Oh, cool.
And then I use this map actually I have some free stories that I put out, and that's the cover.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
What's
Cool.
it say where New Mexico be? It says West something.
The
Caldera?
West Caldera. Well, they're west of the Caldera, and there's the New Colorado Protectorate and Sierra Nevadas and the Sierra Madres, and the Caldera is a big important part of the story. So, and at some point there's a war between West Caldera and New Colorado, which is also a big important part of the story.
Cool.
So I have to know, is Tucson still there?
It may be, it might be. It was never in the story.
Okay.
There's
My old hometown, so yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, you took Texas right out of there. They're gonna be mad.
Another thing I did was it's not a map, but I made for one of the paranormal series that I wrote with Ann Barwell. We created a wiki page about the city, and the city is actually based off of again a real city. That's Lakewood, Ohio, where I worked, and I knew the city very well. So but we created a wiki page of the city history.
That's cool.
All right.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Totally jealous right now.
Yeah.
You guys need to do like one of these panels if you haven't yet on story Bibles.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
yeah.
I've already been talking about that because I'm the queen of story Bibles. Okay, Elizabeth, if you want to stop sharing, then.
So I just click the X?
Yep, just click. Well, actually, I think you have to. Yeah, there you go. So what do you guys think a map adds to your writing? Obviously for the reader, it's this luscious experience of being able to sort of visually see where you, the storyteller, are taking us, right? That's great. But for you as a writer, what do you think it does for you? And let's start with you, Matthew. Elizabeth Cat keeps trying to join us on the Zoom.
Cat attack. Sorry about that.
Well, we sort of mentioned it before too. It's like, it helps me to remember where things are,
Right.
so that I don't,
Especially important in a series.
yeah. So I don't misplace things. It helps, for the Brides of Dracula series, the way that's set up is that there's a historical section. It's 3 books. There's a historical part of each book, and there's a modern day part of each book. So the maps help me to kind of, if I have a part set in Sarajevo in 1600 versus in Sarajevo in 1990.
Very different.
Very different. trying to remember where things are, but too, just the idea of, I had the modern day part set in the 90s, and it's set in the southeastern Europe. A lot of it is set in what used to be Yugoslavia, and then the 90s they were still really having to deal with the aftermath of the conflict there, with the breakup of the country, and all the horribleness of that happened. And so the maps like help me to sort of see how, you know, things happened, how what things went on there, as far as the fighting went, and to know
what got destroyed and what
yeah,
didn't.
exactly. And, you know, just to know, you know, what areas, what areas were badly damaged, what areas may have not been so badly damaged too. I mean, the other thing too is, and I tell this story, like I've told this story in a panel before too, is I just love these little details. Like there's a mountain range in northern Greece called the Unwritten Mountains. And the reason they're called that is because when the Ottoman Turks came into the area and took over, the local population, rather than surrender, they all retreated up into the mountains and basically waged low-key guerrilla warfare on the Turkish authorities for the next 500 years. So the official map makers for the Sultan, rather than show him an area of his empire and embarrass him by showing him an area of his empire that he didn't fully control, just left the whole mountain range off the map.
Oh my word.
So, you know, just I love like using little bits and like being able to take little bits off of maps and things like that I can use in stories, either as inspiration for a story or part of a story, or just as color, you know, to add more, you know, add more interest to a story I'm writing. The other thing too is like the mountain range that separates Albania from Kosovo. It's called the Accursed Mountains.
And that's straight out of Tolkien, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that in the work. I mean, you know, just
yeah, you'd be taking a ring there.
You have to throw in information like that, and you know, like I said, as just color to enrich the story is kind of cool.
Yeah,
that is super cool. Michael, what about you? How do you feel it helps you as a writer to have maps?
I feel like maps humanize a space. Maps tell us a lot about like what's important to the people in a place. And ultimately, that's what the story is going to be about. And they also tell us like what it turns out was not important that maybe should have been, things like that. There's, you know, my Servant Sovereign series is historical and modern day time travel urban fantasy in San Francisco, which is a place that's like both heavily modified and sort of like managed as a landscape, but also historically was very wild and unmanaged. And so like, if I'm writing a book in that series that has a scene that happens in 1870, that's a very different San Francisco landscape and very different expectations and a different size of the city and all kinds of things. And if the next scene, because it's time travel, is set in 2019 or whatever, because I've not really dealt with 2020 in that series, then that's a radically different place. And so like, comparing the two tells you a lot about sort of like the intentions that people had, you know, why did the city develop in a certain way, things like that. With Autumn is, in reality, Autumn is like one half San Francisco and one half DC. And it's sort of the two of them merged together wherever I find it convenient. And I've like never sat down and picked, you know, these are the parts of the city that are San Francisco and these are the parts that are DC, because it's a noir series. And in noir, do you want the protagonist to like, you know, walk into the warehouse at the moment the deal goes down? And it doesn't really matter how long it takes them to get there. You know, they're going to get there when the deal goes down. So you want like locations, but you don't care so much about landscape. And I just, either way, I feel like for me, the biggest use of a map is to be a visual representation of the intentional and unintentional effects that people's choices had on the land around them and the place where they live, you know. And
that's
when I'm drawing maps,
that's a fascinating way to look at it, because I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective.
It's you know, it's like in the same way that if you want to know whether or not to order DoorDash from a place, you look at its menu online. If you want to know a little about the flavor of a city, you look at a map of it and you're going to see something. You look at a map of Boston versus a map of New York, and you can tell that one of them was a planned space and one of them just happened when people showed up.
Just meandered, yes.
You know, and that's really important. Do you want to do the, like, for everybody who has maps to show maps whenever, or do you want to have like an organized map showing time?
No, go ahead and show if you want to show now. Go ahead, please.
Sure.
Jump in.
Let's see. Let me share my PowerPoint.
You're
Can you
so
see that?
organized.
So this is one that I did in Krita with the digital pen, and this is like a specific park in the city of Autumn. And it's kind of based on Golden Gate Park, but it's not exactly Golden Gate Park, obviously, if you know Golden Gate Park. But this was just like an opportunity for me to say, okay, in the part in the first book when they walk to a place, then this is how far into the park they've gone. And it's kind of remote as compared to the parts that are just like where people go to play soccer or whatever.
Right.
And that's like one of the big uses of drawing just like part of the city for me, is just to like get a sense of what seems realistic of, you know, if there's a place where people go to do things that they're probably not supposed to do in public, then how far away does that need to be and things like that.
Right. Right.
And then one time I sat down to draw a particular part of that park and decided to draw the city's skyscape from there instead, and just preferred that. And that's what that person got for a map that month. And then
That person, huh?
Mhm.
The one guy?
Yeah, exactly. That person. I actually asked her to not be at that tier anymore and to like go down into something easier to do that I would not have to support. For like, there's a scene in the first book and a scene in the second book that happened at this location in the city. And so
Right.
it became like really important to me to have a really strong sense of visually of what it looked like. So I drew this like really super detailed map on paper and then scanned it in for that person. But then they also wanted to see like the front of one building in it. So I drew a little drawing of the front of the building for them. Why not? And again, like for me, the biggest use is all this does is help me sort of build, okay, these are the details that I should mention when they get
Right.
there. Instead of saying they got to the clinic, I can say, you know, they got to the clinic and behind it there was this church and, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Right. And looking at, see, I love this. This is the kind of map that is my jam, because I'm very much, I was a city in city planning and economic development. So I'm like, ooh, what's on the other corner?
Right.
I always need to know what's on
Right?
the other corner.
And I
Okay, so
found
are you-
myself
Matters.
in some
Are you-
trouble because when I described this scene in the first book, this location, I had not drawn a map of it. And so I was just like, there are cafes and there are some houses around and there's a park and there's this clinic. And then when I went to draw it, I was like, why did I put so many freaking things in? Like, who would live here, you know? But apparently rich people do. And then I went and drove around in like an actual like planned sort of town within a town, and the next town over there are a couple of like big developments.
Yeah,
where
planned unit developments.
where they've built apartments and suburban detached housing and some townhomes and like a little tiny center in the middle that has like a grocery store and a couple of restaurants and a doctor's
Right.
office.
Right.
And that I was like, oh, okay, this totally flies, because there's a place across from the dry cleaner, which is next to the, you know, park, quote unquote,
Right.
like the size of a postage stamp, which is across from the McMansion, you know. So, okay, apparently that is what rich people do. And then because my editor told me I had to, then I started out by drawing like a way zoomed out idea of like, what are the general regions of the city and how far are they? But I refuse to be limited in like how long it will take Valerius to get from one place to another. I just want him to get from that place to the other. And if it needs to take a long time, then that's fine. And if it needs to be fast, then that's fine too. And I can figure out ways to make either of those things happen.
Right.
But, you know, but also this was a way for me to say, okay, there's got to be like a downtown where the government buildings are. And so like I thought, okay, I'll draw in something called Autumn Center and I'll populate that later. And then in writing the second book, that's turned into, oh, I need a place where there's government buildings. I've got one now in this little map. That's been a useful sort of like foundation for coming up with places to use later.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And that's the end of the share.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that I think that we as writers have to really consider is and one of the reasons I love maps so much is at some point you need to know where the drugstore is. Where, you know, is it 20 miles away, or like in Tamsin's world, is it 50 miles to the next, you know, civilization and town? You know, is it 10 miles by horseback? And how long does that take? I mean, when you're writing historicals, you have to figure out how long it is by horse or wagon. And if
By
you're
walking,
in a
by yes, at a trot, at a gallop.
and
And you
if
have to
you're
figure that out when you are at post-apoc too, because they travel
absolutely
by horse and by train.
yeah, and if you are scavenging supplies along the way, you really have to figure it out.
Okay.
Or if you've got a post-apocalyptic where bad things come out at night, you have to know where the oases are and the resting spots that'll save you and protect you. And so mapping is always key within the world and without. I think that it's obviously we're all map nerds, right? So we love the maps, but readers seem to really, really like them too. What do you think a map provides for readers that maybe is different than what it does for writers? Obviously, it gives us all a sense of place, and we know that the corner of string and has the lab in it. But and we can say that every book we write. Okay, this lab is in a corner of these two streets, and we remember to do that, a la the book Bible you're mentioning, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think it does for the readers? Why do you think readers like them so much? Scott, let me start with you since I mentioned you.
All right. Well, I had a whole answer prepared for the other one, so I'm going to give a real brief answer to that other one.
Okay. Oh, yes, please. I'm sorry, I didn't finish. Going
That's
on.
right. No, so basically for me, the map is sort of a co-storyteller. It's something that as I'm writing the story, I'm consulting with the map and I'm finding out new possibilities and like finding new areas, and like I could take the characters up here or down there, and oh, I should name that mountain, and now this is going to have these properties. Just a quick example of that. This is the work in progress map that I have for a city called Galton, and it's on these volcanic spines in the middle of a river. And I just had this realization as we're talking here today that the reason that the colonists to this world put their city on the spines is because it's safe from anything that might be out there. It's surrounded by water and it's easy to defend. And I had never thought of that before. I made this city with this map in this way. And now I'm like, okay, I can work that in the next part of the story somehow. So like it is really this almost partner in figuring out where the story can go, new things you can put in the story, new possibilities. Same thing with historical, like you're looking at your map and okay, this next city is over there, so they could go there and do this thing next. For the reader, I think it just makes it a lot more real. It lets them immerse themselves in this world in a way that they couldn't if they didn't have that. I can actually, again, just visualize how close things are to each other, what they might look like, how long it would take. And as a real map nerd, I love doing that. I love just spending time, like anytime I get a new reference to a new city or a new something, I go back to the map and just like look it over and kind of think it out and how would that all work? And where might they go next? Because if they're at this city and they came from this one, they might be at that one next. And what's that going to be like? So it heightens the experience for me as a reader and just gives me a more real feeling for the world and world building.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I should make sure that I ask that previous question about, what did they do for you as an author to Elizabeth and to Tamsin too. So Elizabeth, what do you think it does in terms of your writing process to create the map and have the map?
I wrote a series of romantic suspense mystery thrillers, and 3 of the books take place in the Black Hills, in the wilderness. So I found out a long time ago that if you contact any state's tourism department, they will send you free stuff.
Oh yeah.
And, a lot of the free, along with the free stuff, are these beautiful maps of the geographical landmarks and the area. So I had to figure out how long was it going to take to get from one part of the Black Hills to the other, and how would somebody get to the base of Devil's Tower, and so that helped me just plan out the book. With Centuries, with the books that I have the actual map in the books, that was just more of a nice big visual for me. That okay, we span all of North America. Parts of Central America, so I had to be able to move my characters via horseback or train, realistically and logically from one spot to the other. But for me, just opening up my maps and planning out where the people are going to go and what event is going to happen where. That just it's almost like a type of outlining, maybe I would say.
Yeah. That's great. Tamsin, same for you. I'm sorry, I got distracted by the answers and went off on other questions. So
That's
how
okay.
do you think it helps you as an author to place yourself in a map? And then
I'm gonna I'm going to share my maps in order to answer
Yes,
that question.
please.
So
Yay.
let's see here. I got to make sure I choose the right screen.
This is like map nerd heaven, guys.
It is. It is.
I think it's
Show
this
me,
one.
show me,
Let
show me.
know. Are you seeing anything other than me? Are you seeing my screen yet?
Nope, just
Not
you.
yet.
Okay, so I think I have to do this.
Yes,
there
you
go.
do. Yes, you do.
Awesome.
You got
Yes. Oh,
Oh,
pretty.
wow.
There it
Cool.
is.
So this shows you a map of New Mexico and the area at the time. Obviously, it's not showing you past, it's not showing you Albuquerque or anything at this point, but it is showing you the breakdown of the area in which, I use and White Oaks, Fort Stanton, Lincoln, Roswell, everything happens really there. I so badly like wanting to point at things.
Yes.
Does this show up? Can you
It
see my
does.
little-
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes.
So Lincoln is where most things happen. Fort Stanton, of course, where Billy was killed. Spoiler alert. Died in 1881. If you don't
Wait,
know,
he's dead?
What? Not in my books, but whatever. So I use this, and I actually have a really big map that shows all the places Billy went in New Mexico, and it tells me how far the distance is and everything. But that thing is almost the size of my wall, and I couldn't get a picture of that well enough to even show it to you guys. But I think that what helps people here, this is one of the ones from the Christopher Nolan's book. That line in the center there is the, of course, this takes up 2 pages. So this was me really pressing this book onto a little copy machine. And it's actually under glass and it hangs up right here as I work, because a lot of times I had to remember who lives friggin' where.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Wortley is here, Mills, and I don't even know who Sean was, by the way. They're never mentioned, but hey, they're on the map. So when I have to mention houses, when they're on the top of the McSween house and he sees someone on the house across the way, a sharpshooter, I have to know who lives where.
Right.
And this really helps out with that. So now these books, obviously, this really is fantastic. And this is what helps me as a writer is that, and I think these help readers in the same way, is it helps them get immersed in it. I think that is something that, not that your writing doesn't take them there on its own, but there are people who are definitely more visual and they really want to see it, especially if they really love the world you've created, or if they're really into like the history you're writing about, like Dracula and Billy the Kid, and they want to see. And this way you can actually even see with something like this, you can look at, like, this is what's now in the courthouse. It's the only 2-story building in all of Lincoln, and that was really an important thing. Which is another reason why I get so angry at the end of Young Guns. Man, someday I'll tell you a fun story about how I reacted when I watched that movie and my stepmother's reaction watching me watch that movie. So what's great about this, though, is you can see all the numbers and it tells you what's where. And so if you're not sure, and I like these maps, they really are topographical. They're a little bit 3D, and they give you just a better idea. These are, so the Tunstall store is there now. Still, none of this back here is there. Okay. This, of course, burned down at the end of the 5-day battle. So this is a great way of people seeing, when I talk about this area in there, that people can actually look at that map and they can see it. Fort Sumner, I've been using this one while working on in 1881 when Billy is shot by Garrett. You can see here it says Billy, the kid's last walk. And it shows he went over to Pete's house. And there's lots of these kinds of really fantastic stuff. This is a little more, this is again another one from Frederick Nolan. And it shows me where everyone died. I'm not kidding, y'all.
A death map. Yay.
Yeah, like it's, look, this is the next page. Tells you which ones, what houses are what. And then it tells you killed here, who killed them. I was like, this is
Tamsin, be still my heart. You've got both my favorite things, and you're a bunch of dead people and
maps and dead people. Wait till you get to my next series, girl. You and I are gonna talk.
Now I'm not seeing a magical corral on any of these maps. I'm
yeah,
a little disappointed.
See, this is what I'm talking about. So yeah, so that's a little bit, but it's nice because I can go back and you can say, hey, people, and this shows you this here. It's the reason it's highlights because I was really working at the time trying to understand where people died on April 1st when they killed the sheriff and his men. And so this was an interesting thing because there's a house here now. That wasn't there at the time. So I was like, how are they shooting and killing here? It's because at the time you can tell here there wasn't a house in the way, and there now is. And I've been doing, let me stop sharing, there we go. And so I actually have created a series of videos of touring Lincoln. And one of the tours is I'm standing back right where Billy and them would have shot the sheriff. And I talk about how I'm like, you see, there's this house and that wouldn't have been there. And that's why, and I move forward and show you the angle that they would have shot and killed Sheriff Brady. Okay. And so, so these maps, I think, number one, it helps me as a writer make sure I'm accurate. Because one of the things I first told people in Lincoln when I started this, and I met them years ago, was I'm going to keep this history as exact as I possibly can, even though this is fantasy. Because I like the idea of kids getting involved in history, because I'm a teacher, getting involved in loving history through fantasy. And so, so I think this pulls kids and adults into history. And I think as a writer, it helps me get things correct so they can truly learn what they can from it. And it helps them become more and more immersed in the story.
The other cool thing about your death map there is you can say things now in your writing like, and he died just 3 feet away and 5 days after so-and-so. Yeah. It gives you that kind of really cool, be able to, be able to be specific in the writing and give those neat little details.
What's fun is that someone once was like, well, where did Brady die? I said, so, and I think I put it in the video. I'm like, see where that fire hydrant is?
Is that the memorial fire hydrant?
Yeah, really. He died literally on the street, just like right in that area. Like, so, but it's funny because I posted a picture on my page on Facebook, and it's this little shed. And someone actually wrote on the other day, it said, what is this a picture of? And I was like, oh, that's actually where McSween and Tunstall are buried, even though they're not marked at all, and they're probably under that shed.
Creepy, but fun.
They are marked. They're marked behind the Tunstall store with these really nice crosses that have their names, and it's meant to be a picture kind of thing. But they're probably next door, and they're probably underneath the water tank or the or the shed. And of all of them, the only one who is embalmed is Tunstall, because they thought that his parents would want him shipped back to England, and they didn't. So he's the only one that's preserved. So that's the kind of fun stuff I think that the maps really help with for me and for readers that read the stuff I write.
Well, I think it's really interesting too, because the changes, like you were talking about, Matthew, where a city that, especially if you're using an existing city like you are, Michael, with San Francisco and Washington, as a city changes and shifts, and you're projecting, of course, into the future or to a future time, mapping the changes also helps, I think, as a writer, in that, you know, what becomes, like in the castle where I did all these castle floor plans, what was a, you know, a still room becomes a kitchen or a pantry, or, you know, but before that it was this, or it was a chapel. And as writers, we can use those things. And maps of Boston, like you were talking about, historical maps of Boston, to see what are in Chicago, I've used those too, to see how the city has changed over time, like you were talking about, Michael, where you can see what a city was focused on. Trains, in the case of Chicago. You can see by the way the map changes over time that was the focus, and what builds up around it, and all those sorts of things. It's really, really fascinating. I hate to say it, but we are at time. This has been absolutely fabulous, and I would love to nerd out on maps with y'all again at some point. But as we're ending, let's go around and let's tell everybody where they can find you and your maps on the web. And let's start with Matthew.
Okay, so I'm at on the web, I'm at jmsaunders.com. If you go there and you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, I have all of my social media presences: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. Something related to this, on Pinterest, I actually have, you know, boards for my books that have pictures of all of these places. Like if you
cool.
in the Dracula series, like pictures of all the cities in Eastern Europe, of things like that, and some maps there too, actually. So, you know, that's where you can find me. And again, I wrote the Brides of Dracula trilogy and Dreadful Penny Occult Detective series.
Cool. Scott?
Okay, so you can find me at jscottcoatsworth.com, and I'm losing my fingers here, but yeah. Also, so Fix the World just came out. That's up here. That's an hopeful anthology that I'm in and put together. It's got 12 stories about how we can fix the world by sci-fi writers. Drop Knots is coming out in the 10th of May, and that's my next in my Liminal Sky kind of group of trilogies. I did have one quick thing for you guys and other authors. A really cool thing to give away at cons, and very easy to do. Order some parchment paper, photocopy one of your hand-drawn maps, and number it and sign it. And then
Ooh,
goes out to your
cool.
biggest fans. It costs you almost nothing, and it gives the fans a really cool look at like how your process and your map building thing is. But yeah, jscottcoatsworth.com has all my information.
Nice.
Excellent. Elizabeth?
I have a website that's Emotion in Motion, and it's elizabeth-noble.com. And all my social media links and pictures of my Centuries map. And I don't think I have any pictures of any of the other that I've used in any of the other series, but there's all the links to the books and wherever else you can find me on the web.
Excellent. Michael?
Okay.
You can find me at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com, and there are links there to my Facebook and my Twitter, which are my two main social media things, and my Patreon. But like, if you support me on Patreon, all you're doing is paying for me to support other writers. So, you know, it's awesome. And with my Facebook, I also do a thing called San Francisco Sundays, where I post like sort of extended essays about the histories of specific locations in San Francisco that show up in my Servant Sovereign books.
Oh, most excellent. Tamsin?
You can find me at tamsinsilver.com. If you go there, there's all kinds of information and snippets from the things I write, as well as a page of videos. You can watch all the cons I've done and videos of all of those. And there's going to be, I'm actually in the process of building a page on there that's going to have a lot of the photos I showed today, which will also tell you which books I get them from. So in case you want to get the books and you think that would be something you'd like, I can help promote more writers so they can get that as well. But you can also find me on Facebook under Tamsin Silver, and Twitter, though I mostly am over there on Facebook and my website.
Great. And I'm Jeanne Adams, and you can find me at jeanneadams.com and on most social media. And I am going to steal that idea, Matthew, of putting up things on Pinterest that have the maps, because that's cool.
Yeah.
And again, thank all of you for being here on ConTinual. Thank you out there in the audience for listening and watching, and we'll see you around the web.